C.S. Lewis gave the illustration in, I think it was in Mere Christianity, where he was kind of describing this idea, and he mentioned, it's like a mother who wants her children to learn responsibility. So she lets them, her children in their room, play with their toys. And then she says, when you're done, you need to clean up your room, or I think maybe or you don't get dessert or something.
Yeah.
And of course, what she wants them to do is clean up their room.
And get dessert.
And that would be best for them.
Mm-hmm.
But if they don't, that's not because her will was for them to not do that. Nonetheless, her will for them to freely choose the good allowed for that relative evil to take place.
Yeah, and in their childishness, they see it as evil. It's like, how could you be so cruel as to dangle the word ice cream in front of us and then rip it from us?
Right.
Well, I'm actually offering you something that you didn't have before.
Right.
And had you done this thing, you had gotten it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting too. The word disaster sounds evil all the time, like disaster. We never think of that in a positive way, right? But something can bring disaster. They brought disaster on themselves, or this whole thing brought disaster, or God brings disaster as judgment. So don't always think of these words in these univocal ways. Most words are equivocal and analogical, and the Bible's full of those. And in this sense, this passage of Scripture uses it equivocally, the word evil equivocally and analogically.
Yeah. So then with that in mind of sort of, okay, character of God and what a God of that character can create, we understand a bit of why some of the early Christians were attempting to describe this reality, and especially when they were in the milieu of Manichaeans and people of other religious persuasions that were saying God actually does create evil. He create, there's got to be this balance of good and evil, and or some other worldview version of or a dualistic thing,
right?
And so they're in this milieu, and they're trying to stand up for the character of God. So what they're doing, to Chris's question, when they say evil is not a thing, they're making a metaphysical distinction,
right?
They're not saying it's not real in your life. That they're saying it has no being, it has no essence. David Bentley Hart called it an ontological wasting disease.
Yeah, I love that phrase.
That it's not something God created. It doesn't have life in itself. And the reality of it is real. The consequences of it are real. You feel it. It's a real thing. It's not minimizing evil in your life when it happens. It's just making a metaphysical distinction that gives you, I think, reason to continue to trust the God who created the world, even though evil has come into the world.
Right. Yeah. And I think that even the way Chris had asked the question is to understand that it does do violence to the biblical understanding of evil if you have this sterile understanding of evil is simply the lack of good.
Right.
What they mean classically, as you just explained, and I think we can, with certain analogies, actually explain it further, is that God is the source of all of existence. He is the grounding of all existence. He's not a being among beings. He is the source of all being.
Right.
So he is the necessary being. And because he is the seat of goodness, therefore, everything that is has ontological rooting and grounding is in him. And evil is the corruption, is the perversion of that which is intended. It is the corruption and the perversion of that which has its own ontological grounding. What I mean by that is ontology is just simply a fancy way of saying the state of being, or what is the thing in its nature? What is the nature of things? So evil doesn't have its own ontology. Right. It doesn't have an independent ontology. It only exists as the parasite or the privation or the corruption of that which does have grounding, which is goodness, because goodness is rooted in God. And God is the necessary being from which all other beings derive their existence. So evil doesn't have its own essence, its own being. And so it depends on goodness to exist. But notice, goodness does not depend on evil to exist.
Right.
Goodness depends on God to exist. But because God is the good, then good, in a sense, necessarily exists. Right. But evil does not necessarily exist. It could have been otherwise. To think of it this way, a good analogy is rust on a vehicle or on a piece of metal. The metal exists, and the rust is the corruption of it. But can we say that thing is rust? It isn't actually a thing in and of itself. It is the condition of the metal once it's been corroded by oxidation and by the forces around it, like the water and salt. And, here we live in Michigan. We're quite familiar with the rust factor on our cars. But there's rust on our cars. That's a thing. That's really a real condition of our cars. But the rust isn't actually a thing because you can't actually you can remove the rust by excising it from the car, just like necrotic flesh on someone. You debride that, you get rid of it, but, and it's real, but it's really just lifeless flesh. It's not dead in the sense that it's dead flesh is a thing. It's that flesh without life is a thing, so to speak. So you can remove it, but you can't really restore the rust. You can't take the rust and make that rusted thing the perfect metal it once was. Spiritually, however, in the Christian faith, you can actually do that.
Right.
Which is the beauty of the whole thing, is that God, who is the seat of all goodness, can actually restore that which has been rusted. Now, I want to make sure we understand something. This is not an essential. This is not a dogma upon which Christian orthodoxy hangs, that this idea that evil is the privation of good, or that God does not create things that are evil. I think biblically speaking, it's consistent that God does not create evil. However, you're not going to lose your salvation or be excommunicated from churches because you have more of a different view on these things, or you're not even sure what
or you're
these
just
things
uncomfortable with saying evil is a privation. And maybe you felt it in your life and you're like, I just can't say that.
Right. And I can say from even experiencing it in my own life very recently, not just discomfort, but actual evil. I understand why people bristle at the idea that evil is simply the privation of good, but properly understood philosophically and theologically, it's more than just the lack of something. It's the corruption of it, which makes it worse in many ways. So it's real, but it's not the way it was intended to be, which gives us hope.
Yeah. Kind of, and we kind of talked before too, but the way you can corrupt a house by burning it down.
Yeah.
That's a real thing.
Yeah.
And, there's ashes there. That was once a house. That's a real thing that happened.
Yeah.
Even if, it's, you view it in this absence way.
Yeah.